Glory be to thee, O Lord my God. Make manifest the rivers of thy sovereign might, that the waters of thy unity may flow through the inmost realities of all things, in such wise that the banner of thine unfailing guidance may be raised aloft in the kingdom of thy command, and the stars of thy divine splendor may shine brightly in the heaven of thy majesty. Potent art thou to do what pleaseth thee. Thou verily art the help in peril, the self-subsisting.
Dear friends, thank you so much for joining our Baha'i Agricultural Network. We are very pleased to have with us Mr. Paul Hanley. Mr. Paul Hanley has published 4 books and more than 1,500 articles on the environment, agriculture, and many other topics. Paul is a recipient of the Canadian Environment Award, the Organic Connections Pioneer Organic Communicator Award, and the Miwasalan Conservation Award. He lives in Molokai with his wife, Hale Samimi. Friends, I will ask for you to please mute your microphones, and questions will be at the very end. And Paul, when you are ready, please.
Well, thanks, Netta, and thanks everyone for inviting me and for coming out today. I'm here, as Netta said, on Molokai, the island of Molokai, where my wife and I have recently pioneered, and we're excited to get involved in this community. And you might be hearing roosters crowing a lot in the background. We have all these feral chickens here, and so sometimes people get kind of a kick out of the background noise here. So I have the task of kind of looking at kind of a survey of the writings of the faith that relate to agriculture and food. And of course, that's pretty difficult to do. I got interested in this. I grew up in a rural, in an agricultural province called Saskatchewan in Canada, where a long time ago, most of the people were farmers. And both sets of grandparents were pioneers to Saskatchewan around the beginning of the 20th century. And, but I didn't have anything to do with farming. Both of them quit farming for various reasons and got into house building and things like that instead. And so I grew up in the city, but I kind of got involved in the back to the land movement, the hippie back to the land movement, became very interested in agriculture and growing food, gardening, and so on. And got involved in developing the organic gardening and farming movement in Saskatchewan, which became one of the most, I think the largest group of people. I think something like 1,500 organic farmers now producing organic food on more than 1 million acres. And then I heard about the Baha'i faith later. And I was always very interested to know what the Baha'i faith might say about environmental issues and about agriculture and so on. So initially, I didn't really see much of a connection, but over time, I started to see more and more. And I came to realize that although the Baha'i faith was the first faith to be revealed in the industrial era, it had more to say about agriculture than any other religion, as far as I'm aware. And so I collected writings and so on, and other people have pursued this as well. Like I was recently asked to look at a compilation that Winnie Merritt put together, which is going to be published by the Baha'i Publishing Trust, and she has put together, let's see, what is it here? It's 72,000 words, 110 pages of quotations on agriculture and food. So that's single spaced. So I don't know what it will be ultimately when it's published. So that just gives you an idea of just how much material there is in the Baha'i writings, the sacred writings, but also the writings of the Guardian and the House of Justice and other institutions and agencies of the faith about this topic. So I started to explore that and find opportunities to bring some people together in the Baha'i community to discuss these ideas. And we were able to put together the book Spirit of Agriculture, I think in 2006. And that was kind of fun because it was the first time I tried to, I was living in my acreage out in the country, and I had the old style internet connection using a telephone cable. And I think we exchanged 800 emails at the time, and with 14 different writers from around the world, and put together kind of a perspective on agriculture and the Baha'i faith. And one of the things I contributed was a chapter that was sort of a survey of the writings. So I've continued to do that. And what I'm going to do, because it's it's essentially impossible to really share in a forum like this, but I wanted to show you. I can share my screen. I'm assuming that I'm gonna.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, I'm a co-host now. Okay, I'll try that again. Good. So I wanted to share this. So this is kind of got into this idea of creating systems maps. So how can we? Don't worry about not being able to read it. We'll focus in. But I wondered, how to create a systems map, because I heard Adib Tahirzadeh recently a talk that he gave on YouTube, and he talked about the faith being something like a jigsaw puzzle, and there's all these different pieces, and every one of the pieces is precious, but only when you put it all together do you get the whole picture. And so the idea with this is that the teachings on agriculture and food are part of a kind of a systems approach. And so I found 116 different elements, which kind of, I think, make up a coherent approach to agriculture. And the main title here is around carrying forward. Let's see if I can pull this up. Carrying forward an ever advancing civilization, and the roles of three protagonists. But the interesting thing is that I think in the world order of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah himself says that agriculture is really central. So you're probably familiar with the Baha'u'llah's Tablet of the World. I think it was revealed in 1891, near the end of his life and his ministry. And of course, in that he outlines what he talks about as 5 principles for the administration of human affairs. And that's where he talks about these 5 things. I think there's peacemaking, education, developing moral standards for individuals, and so on. And then he says 5th is agriculture, but then he says that actually agriculture is the most important of these principles. So we put here in this model, this map, we put agriculture as central. And then there's these 4 areas. One is around building unified and prosperous communities. So there's a whole discourse of that in the Baha'i writings. One's about sustaining an ever-advancing civilization, so more the kind of ecological foundations for the New World Order. There's the individual as a protagonist and building the capacity of individuals, and then this things around the idea of building a just and equitable order. So hopefully everybody can see these okay, and I'll just sort of go through a few of them, and I won't take too long, and we can just mostly talk and share ideas. And so under this area of building unified and prosperous communities, the writings say that agriculture, and this is the writings of Al-Baha, agriculture is the fundamental basis of community. And along with that is the idea of the importance of the agricultural class. So farmers come first and are the primary factor in the body politic, but also he talks about other agricultural workers. So there's many people who are not farmers. but are engaged in agricultural work as well. So this is a very important thing. And then related, yes, was there someone? Related to that is valuing agricultural education and training. So the farmer is important, the agricultural class is important, agriculture is the basis of community. And so it makes sense then that there's a lot of value in the writings given to agricultural education and training. And youth are specifically encouraged to study agriculture, and women are encouraged to become involved in agricultural science. And then there's also this idea that agricultural science is actually a form of worship. So these are all, just a brief summaries of some statements that are available in the writing. Then we look at this idea of beginning with the village. So Abdu'l-Baha has a whole discourse on how we can make progress in the world in terms of raising the standard of living of people, creating a more prosperous society. And he says in that we begin with the village, and he talks about how the agricultural class is the largest group, the largest form of employment in the world. So that's why you have to start with that. And interestingly, I've done some research on this, and have found out that still today, even though we're kind of in this urbanized world where the majority of the people now live in urban areas, there's still about a third of humanity is farmers and farm families. There's something like 500 million farms. Most of them are very small, but if you include the farm families, it's something like 2.5 billion people still engaged to it. It remains the largest occupation, especially if you consider all the people who are also engaged in the food industry, in manufacturing farm equipment and providing farm credit and fertilizers and all of these things, and then processing food and selling it. It becomes really a major part of the economy. So this teaching seems to still be very very important. Then there are a whole bunch of teachings on grassroots development processes. The master, again, in 1875, wrote this incredible treatise on development, The Secret of Divine Civilization, where he goes into great detail about processes of development and revitalization of communities. So we can look at many of the things that are elements of this revitalization process as being part of the basic order of Baha'i communities. Things like devotional meetings are the basis of building the devotional character of a community, which ultimately effloresces into the house of worship and its dependencies, including dependencies for agricultural research. Things like the 19-day feast that bring people together, build unity in the community, all these different festivals and holy days, which Abdu'l-Baha said should generate philanthropic institutions. And then we look at, for example, the cultural significance of food and how it's always been a thing that have brought people in the world together. So this, again, I'm saying we're talking about a systems approach. So all of these ideas in the faith, like nonpartisanship and building local governing institutions and houses of justice in every community, and building consultative processes, all kind of pertain very much to the development of agriculture. So we have concepts around wealth distribution. It's very interesting that if you look at who in the world is extremely poor to the point where there's malnutrition and so on, it's kind of ironic, but almost all of them are the rural poor, small farmers and so on. And so this is a major concern, this idea of wealth distribution. So Abdu'l-Baha has a whole discourse on this concept of a village storehouse, which is kind of like a community development bank or cooperative kind of approach, where people work collectively to build the wealth of communities. And then he talks about many ideas around things like profit sharing, inheritance rules, elimination of monopolies, interest on lending, and so on, and things like fair wages and sharecropping arrangements. There's also this concept of the right to work. For example, in the Kitabi Akdas, Baha'u'llah says, it's the duty of those who are in charge of the organization of society to give every individual the opportunity of acquiring the necessary talent in some kind of profession, and also the means of utilizing such a talent, both for its own sake and for the sake of earning the means of his livelihood. So there's many, many teachings that pertain to this, and the whole idea of equal opportunity of access to resources. And then, of course, we go into areas like gender equality and the role of women in agriculture. And we know that in many places, women are the main agricultural producers. And so we have teachings around prioritization of the girl child in education, family planning, and modernizing dowries. And I always thought that was so interesting when I first read the Kitabi Akdas and there were teachings about dowries, and I thought, we don't even have dowries. But of course, much of the world does have dowries. And if you go to the film Frontiers of Learning and you look in the section on Bihar and Sharif in India, there's a very interesting discourse there about the impact of dowries and how the Baha'i approach to dowries really changes and improves the situation for farm families. So as I mentioned before, there's this idea of grassroots development, the need for education for everyone, this right to education as part of this process of community building. And here we have in the Baha'i world this training institute with education for children, youth, and adults, and a role for youth to become leaders. So it's very interesting, and there's, I don't know how many of you heard about the village that Abdu'l Baha started at Asiya in Jordan, and what an interesting kind of model it is for rural development. And interestingly, in that model, we see all the elements of the Baha'i process, the kind of methodology that's being used in the Baha'i faith today around the Training Institute, the core activities, and so on, all being employed back in the early 1900s by Abdu'l Baha in those communities. And so that is kind of the area of building unified and prosperous communities. And I won't take as long on these other points, but sustaining an ever-advancing civilization. So this is kind of the ecological foundations that as I see it, and the concept of nature as a sacred reflection of divine, and the idea of the book of creation and nature as revelation. These are kind of philosophical underpinnings of an approach to building long-term sustainability for an ever-advancing civilization. That includes sustainable food systems and the idea of balancing human progress and ecological regeneration. So there's many different ideas here in the writings that are very important around the intrinsic value of the countryside, of soil, of biodiversity, and how humanity are trustees of the ecosphere. And the idea that actually nature has rights. On one hand, nature is perfect, sort of a paradoxical thinking, but on the other side, it's in need of development. So it's really the role of human beings to assist all creatures to achieve their perfect state or their paradise. So I've been recently exploring some of the ideas in the teachings of the Bab about this, and Dr. Nader Saidi has some wonderful writings and lectures that he talks about this concept in the writings of the Bab, which is very, very profound, about the justice for all species and the rights of all things, and the need for human beings to involve in helping every created thing which aspires to be perfect to achieve their state of perfection. So let's see, what else? So the next thing is this idea of yeah, building individual capacity. And again, if you go to, if anybody is studying book 13 on social transformation or social action, we talk about how the individual has to develop spiritual capacities in this process of development. And so, for example, trustworthiness has an influence, not just in society, but Baha'u'llah says it's the supreme instrument for preserving the world of being. So it actually also has a very important influence on this area of sustaining ecosystems. So all of these different things, this twofold moral purpose, developing our capacities, ensuring that one thing would be the quality of our food and so on, helps to develop our capacities. And so there's all kinds of teachings about food and our orientation in society as individuals of service. And so I won't go too much into that. And over here is the last area would be building a just and equitable world order. So we're now in a global system. We have a global food system. How should it be organized? The operating principle, as always, is the realization of the oneness of humanity and rededication of our society to the welfare of humanity. Again, we have to look at wealth distribution among nations, fair trade practices, ameliorating international market forces, the role of peacemaking, which liberates wealth so it can be used for proper forms of development. And all these ideas around governance and the need for different governing institutions on the international level to deal with the problems which are now global in nature, whether it's environmental issues like climate change or finding proper ways of organizing the world's food system and so on. So I'm going to just leave it at that. I hope this kind of method of sharing kind of an overview of a systems approach to the teachings was useful, and love to hear your comments and questions and so on. And maybe I'll even be able to answer some of them.
Yeah, so friends, if you have a question, please use the raise your hand feature or just raise your hand and I'll try to get you to be able to ask your question. That was I will tell you, I really loved that screen share. It was really nice to see all of that in perspective. And thank you so much for sharing that there are 72,000 words and over 110 verses in the Baha'i writings about agriculture. I think that's wonderful. And I think that's good for all of us to know that. Robert, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation, very informative and educational. So my question for you is that given that your presentation and the different elements that create the network is so comprehensive, that same chart or network would apply to many different other titles, not just agriculture.
Yes.
Am I right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the actual title is around building an ever-advancing civilization or carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. But I think it's, yeah, the agriculture is very central to the new world order of Baha'u'llah. But everything is affected, and there are many different things we could add to this map. So, yeah, but I think you're right. It could apply to many different topics.
Okay, Scott, please. Please unmute yourself, Scott. Thank you.
There we go. Sorry. It's been a little while since I've been on my computer here, so I have a little trouble finding the raise a hand and unmute. I used to, my mother and father-in-law used to live on Molokai. I lived on Oahu. I'm wondering, are you there at the Baha'i Center in Molokai?
No, No, I'm at home here.
Oh,
We have a home in, yeah. You used to live in Molokai?
yeah, it looks a little bit like the Baha'i Center there.
No,
So yeah,
I'm in Kuala Pu'u.
okay, okay. I was wondering. So are you farming there then?
No,
As part of your
no, no, we're not. My wife and I are both working. Like I work as a writer, and my wife's a psychologist, and so we're still doing that kind of online now. You can kind of be anywhere, it seems like. So, but I am trying to garden and be involved in the sustainable food movement here to some degree, which is quite strong. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just recently returned to Iowa to care for my mother, and my father. My mother passed recently. My father's getting older, but we have a large acreage here, and so I've been able to start teaching myself farming. So it's really encouraging and interesting to hear this tie-in that I hadn't made the connection at all myself. So thank you very much for kind of bringing this element to the forefront.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you want to get, if you go to the book Spirit of Agriculture, which is also now available as an ebook, so it's not that expensive, from George Ronald, but you can get it on the Amazon and so on. Then in there, I did an article which is kind of a survey of the writings. So it goes into this stuff, but it actually has the writings there and so on. Yeah, so thanks. So when did you leave here, Scott? Not to get too deep into this one, but
Oh, I left Hawaii in 2001, and but I made several trips back to Molokai over the years. I
Okay.
think the last time I was there was over a decade ago.
Okay, great.
If you ever get a chance to take the dirt road that goes to the top of the mountain,
Mhm.
it's breathtaking up there.
Yeah, I need a 4-wheel drive, so
Yeah.
someday we'll get there.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I do want to let the friends know that we are going to have Mr. Paul Hanley join us again. But before I end this session, we do have our founder for Baha'i Agricultural Network, Mr. Jay Craig, here. And he does have just a few words and some thoughts. And I know he wants to thank you, Paul, for being here with us. And I, as on behalf of Baha'i Chronicles, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Before we go to Jay, we do have a question from Derek. Derek, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I noticed I have your book 11, and in your book 11, you talk about animal agriculture. You say that it's less efficient, but it can increase the food supply and improves sustainability and biodiversity and ameliorate climate change. But from what I understand, they say that actually agriculture is one of the main contribution. Animal agriculture is one of the main contributors to climate change.
Yeah, well, I think there's different ways to do it. As far as I understand it, the Baha'i teachings would favor eventually a more vegetarian kind of approach. But of course, they also, accept the idea of eating meat. Sometimes Baha'u'llah even promotes meat eating. And so I think it depends. Like, for example, industrial style meat production and feedlots and large scale production in that way is often pointed out as one of the major contributors to climate change. But there's other forms of production of animals. So, for example, holistic resource management is uses rotational grazing and so on, and it seems to be a very effective way of building soil organic matter and improving the biodiversity and so on. So there's different approaches, and I think that's what I was referring to as a more sustainable approach. Because I would imagine that probably switching to all vegetarian diet is probably I wouldn't be surprised if it's centuries away. But you can start to see people moving in that direction already. I don't know what you think.
Well, I totally agree. I was just, but again, what struck me was when you said in your book, you were saying that it could ameliorate climate change, and I was just that was like, but my understanding was that was the contributor to climate change. But I'll go back and reread it more in depth, maybe, and I'll get a better understanding.
Yeah, there's certainly there's this whole thing called the brown revolution and so on. It's a whole other approach, and using livestock much more intensively to kind of recreate conditions that are almost like the herding, the large herds of animals that help to create grasslands in Africa and Eurasia and North America and so on. And I even know holistic managers in Saskatchewan, where I was, who talked about they use this rotational grazing where they move the animals even more than once a day, and they talk about how gradually they actually start to see native species returning to the pastures and so on. It's quite interesting. Yeah,
Well, thank you.
sure.
Okay, we're going to go to Jay Craig. Jay, please unmute
Okay.
yourself.
All
I
right.
see,
Okay.
I see Brenda has her hand up too.
Yeah, I did ask Brenda to start her video, but I think she might be having some technical issues. So I do need her to start her video.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, Jay, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you. I prepared a few words, and I hope that that we'll have some more questions after I say a few words. So I want to speak tonight about a wonderful opportunity. We can see the pathway from what our speaker Paul Hanley has said, and also what Baha'i has said. Baha'u'llah's emphasis on agriculture's not a romantic dream. It's a it's a it's an idea that's destined to be the foundation for a new world order. We've been told that learning about agriculture is important for the advancing of civilization. We've always believed in Baha'u'llah's beautiful teachings, and it's time to take action on what he says about agriculture. In a religion that's proud of service, in strong families, and that believes in transforming communities through social and economic development, we can do what Baha'u'llah has told us to do. So what must we do? First, face the truth that we can change and we can take action. We must have faith in each other, and faith in our ability to organize, faith in our ability to build a new future if we follow the teachings of Baha'u'llah. So let's search our hearts. Let's commit ourselves together to Baha'u'llah's teachings about agriculture. Let's search our hearts. If we work together with a common faith, we cannot fail. So let's search our hearts to create a new Baha'i culture that includes beautiful gardens.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was beautifully said. I do want to go to Brenda, and I'm sure some people might have some questions for you, but Brenda, thank you so much. Please.
Well, thank you so much for the program. And Paul, it's just wonderful to see what you've laid out. And I was wondering if that chart is in one of your books where we could study it further. And my second question, if you don't mind, is in all of your research, have you come across anything where it says that animal products are not healthy for the human body? I've been a vegetarian many years, and pushing vegan really, and I feel so much better by it. So I just wondered if your research, if you'd stumbled across anything along those lines. Thank you very much.
Well, I think there are many things, but there's probably nothing is more controversial than all the different types of diets that are promoted. And I think that I think it's probably justified to be able to say that people call a plant slant diet is probably more healthy. And in, I don't know if anybody's heard of the blue zones. It's quite an interesting thing that it's sort of sponsored by the National Geographic Society, but there's a researcher who traveled the world and found the places where people live to be exceptionally old and healthy into old age, and they've found, I don't know, 5 or 10 different locations. And in most of those locations, people have what they call a plant slant diet. So they eat meat, but very little bit, just a small amount of it. So yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be nothing more difficult than changing people's traditional eating habits. So I think would be a very slow process to develop our understanding of what the most healthy diets are. And the other thing is probably, I think it might be justified to say that it might really depend on the quality of the meat you eat and how much and so on. But Abdu'l-Baha himself said that it's a more healthy diet. But then I think he himself ate meat, so it's probably maybe a question of amount and that kind of things.
Yeah, Baha'u'llah in the Tablet of Medicine was talking a little bit about moderation, and he was emphasizing a lot of beginning your meal with liquid. But I believe it was Abdu'l-Baha more who was trying to get us to be more plant-based foods. Joe, please ask your question and unmute yourself.
I was going to comment on this vegetarian thing. I consider myself flexitarian, but I'm not big on eating meat. But I'd read that there's certain amino acids and things that it's very challenging to get from plant-based food. And so that it's suggested that what you can get from meat that's hard to get from plants, you could probably get on 4 ounces a week. So if people only ate 4 ounces of meat a week, that would probably meet their nutritional needs. Plus, if you start talking about food justice, where look, it takes about every calorie you put into growing corn, you get 1 or 2 calories back. Now, if you're going to eat meat, it takes about 10 calories of food like corn and all to produce 1 calorie of meat. So in terms of calories, it would make a lot of sense to get most of your food from plant-based, or I like Paul's term, plant slant, because of the input it takes to produce it. And if you're going to talk about food justice and calories around the planet, if everybody's eating like Americans with these copious amounts of meat, and meat that's produced in an industrialized manner, which does contribute greenhouse, the gases and all, or a lack of regenerative kind of agriculture, then we're going to have an impact on the climate, and we're not going to be healthy. But one of the arguments about vegetarian diets or vegan diets is the notion of animals being sentient. Well, it seems to me everything in nature is sentient, period. So if you're worried about eating something that's sentient, you're not going to eat anything. So everybody has to make their own decisions, and right now we're not going to find any balanced information because of the politics and the greed aspects of food production. So I'll just leave it at that. But and then if you're looking at indigenous cultures and being culturally sensitive, if you go to a powwow and you don't eat a bison burger, then you probably you're not participating 100%, in my opinion, humble opinion. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks for this conversation. And thanks for mentioning Winnie Merritt and her compilations. She's been very active in agriculture for the last couple of decades and through the Association for Baha'i Studies and stuff. So this is nice to see people talking about it.
I just wanted to interject that I added the systems map to the chat, so you can just get it from there. And it's sort of a work in progress, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So friends, you do have the ability to copy. All you do is go into the chat, go to the right, and then just go ahead and you can download it. We have our last question, and that'll be Scott. Please unmute yourself.
I didn't have a question so much as a comment. You know, in America, we didn't really eat as much meat as we do now until after World War II. And there was a period, at least this, I believe this to be correct, there was a period of well, what's the word I'm looking for here? Well, there's growth and wealth, and the idea that a piece of meat on every plate at dinner time was a symbol of wealth, so it became a status symbol. But prior to World War II, meat was like a once a week or a special thing. And then also getting back to the point of the difference between huge farming operations where cattle are kept in very tight, relatively small areas compared to what they would be. And yeah, that really does produce a lot of greenhouse gases. But if we use our animals in a more the pigs are very good at turning soil. Chickens are good at keeping ticks and bugs away. And so there are ways to pursue animal husbandry that are healthy and don't involve eating the animals and don't produce the kinds of greenhouse gases that these huge monstrous operations create. And that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, so let's just go to our very last question, and that'll be Jay, or a comment. Jay, please.
Yep. So I just wanted to encourage people to start networking and create a garden club, reach out to people nearby that, and I want to offer my services that if the people that do want to garden, that if they send me photographs, I can draw sketches. I'd like for everybody to have a prayer garden. And I would like to consult with anybody to help them with their vegetable gardens or anything we can do to help more Baha'is be successful in gardening. So put me to work.
Okay, thank you so much. Friends, we do have a Facebook page, which is called Baha'i Agricultural Network. And just to remind the friends, next month, we are privileged to have Mr. Paul Hanley join us again. And the topic will be the involvement of the central figures of the faith in agriculture. And as always, please go to BahaiChronicles.org/online-study so you can look for those upcoming sessions. Thank you, Paul, very, very much, and aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.